Welcome to Afterlife Topics and Metaphysics. This is Cyrus Kirkpatrick. Today we're talking about the 7 things that grieving and dying people don't want to hear about. And you'll hear people saying these things to them, thinking they're coming from like a spiritual perspective, only to find out it's doing 10 times more damage. So this is a topic near and dear to me because, as I sometimes say, my main area is grief and helping grieving people, helping people who are afraid of death, and helping people as well who are about to cross over. And that's what I care about, and so nothing really burns me up more than when I see people saying variations of this to the people who really don't want to hear it, and then cringing as I see it blow up. So this is actually the second take of this video. I just did a 20-minute take of this entire video, only to find out at the end that my microphone had gone unplugged. So because I am that dedicated, I'm here again doing the whole thing over again, hoping that the second take will be a better take. Before we begin, I will ask you to please help out by punching the subscribe button, liking, and sharing the video to keep the channel alive, because that is the lifeblood of YouTube. YouTube will actually squelch channels that don't reach standards of popularity. So if a video doesn't get enough likes, not enough interest, YouTube will say, well, people don't like this video, let's just brush this whole channel under the digital carpet where it'll disappear and we don't have to think about it. So any help in that area is appreciated. Alright, let's get into it. Number 1, when we die, we all become one with God forever. So this is an issue of confusing a literal and philosophical concept. So philosophically, we could say that we're all one with God as we speak right now, because anybody through proper meditation and dedication to this can discover how all consciousness is connected, and they can discover that yes, we are all one with God forever anyway. So this doesn't mean that anything particularly changes when we cross over, if this already exists kind of like as a platitude. So people say this without adding any detail to what that means, and then what people visualize is that you enter into some kind of state of existence where you're no longer who you once were. And then the thing I see again and again when people state this to grieving people is, does that mean that my Johnny, my Billy, my Sarah, my Jean, whomever it is that they've lost, is no longer still Sarah, Billy, Jean, or whomever? They start to think of, well, does this mean that they're now some form that is part of some cosmic entity and it's no longer who I once knew? I can no longer carry on a relationship with that person? Well, we know from after-death contact research that this is false. People who die are still themselves on their own journey in life. They're a higher density being, which isn't really that much of a stretch compared to what we are now. We move up a notch, we move up in vibration, move to a new level, we're still us. Yes, we're already one with God forever. We already have that unity state of existence that we can go into. It doesn't mean that this is some extra, strange, different mode of existence somebody enters into. So people just repeat this like a platitude. They don't really know the impression that this gives to people. Number 2, so this is the one I almost don't have words to describe how angry this one gets me. And yes, I'm mostly Scottish and Irish, so maybe that's why I have a little bit of a temper sometimes, and this is the thing that sets me off. And usually you see this coming out of fundamentalist Hinduism, fundamentalist Buddhism, and you'll see this often as a culturally specific thing. For instance, you might hear this being said in a country like India, and it is a inaccurate and, I'm sorry to say, primitive way of thinking. That you have a loved one who dies an untimely death, and then they blame you. They say it's because of your karma that they died. You did something bad in a past life that led to their death. I can think of nothing more horrific to say to somebody who is grieving. And it's very likely somebody will say this who is themselves grieving, trying to make sense of what happened, and taking the ever wonderful approach of hatred and blame on innocent people to make themselves feel better. So if you're doing that, bravo, you are a scumbag. And I don't care if your culture says it's acceptable. Even people in their own cultures who hear this are going to be extremely broken up by it. It's nonsense. It's related to ancient concepts, and ancient does not mean valid or legitimate. There's no communication with the other side that at all indicates that somebody who crosses over, it's because of something somebody else has done in their past life, and now they have to deal with your death. If something like that ever did happen, it'd be like a one-off situation that's very much related to a very specific case. It's not some kind of a rule or principle that always happens. Variation of this is by saying that they died because of their own karma. This is an arguable position. If somebody dies because of something set up or agreed upon in their life, or they, as an example, let's say somebody murdered somebody in a past life and then they wanted to reincarnate and they wanted to be murdered. It's not unfeasible that this could happen, but again, it's probably quite rare, and the way that it is presented to people is inaccurate. So it will be presented to people like, as if it's like their fault that they ended up with a disease, or it's your fault that you have a disease, or any variation of that. This is a very just harmful thing to say to somebody. It's not accurate. Even if there's a small chance something like this maybe is going on some spiritual, metaphysical level, who are you to be able to say that to somebody else? How would you know? It's not your position to say that to somebody. So what gives you the right? Because you think you're some spiritual person? Let me tell you something. If you don't have any empathy for other people, then you're as spiritual as my Amazon Alexa. Okay, you're as spiritual as a robot, my friend, if you don't have empathy for other people. Number 3, your deceased loved ones are not real, but holographic creations created by blah blah. So anybody who watches my videos probably knows what author I'm referring to. I won't repeat by name. I'm certain, even by implication, I'm going to get 1 or 2 fanboys of this author coming after me with angry emails and responses because I am disagreeing with something somebody said who they like on the internet. Oh no. So this theory is one of those like philosophical quagmires, because you can't really disprove that somebody's an illusion. So how do you prove that you're not an illusion, right? You can't do it. There's probably some terminology for this kind of like logical fallacy or loophole. If you know what it is, please tell me in the comments. But it's one of those things like it's really difficult to argue against it, and people present it as this philosophical point of view, basically, that matrix source consciousness has created this data packet that represents a deceased loved one coming out of like the Akashic or the universal computer code, so that it can alleviate your grief to make your own crossing over more optimal by making your life more pleasant, blah 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 blah. We know all of this is nonsense based upon after-death communications, credible mediumship, and credible out-of-body experiences involving meeting with real people who we knew in this life who have crossed over, who often feel insulted when you insinuate that they might be not real illusions or holographic creations. Of course, I've ranted about this numerous times in this channel. Maybe you guys are sick of this by now, but I still hear this coming up. I hear people who are big proponents of these theories telling this to people who are grieving, and I just have to just cringe, because it's the worst thing to say to somebody when they've had some beautiful experience having an after-death contact with grandma, and they go on the internet, which let me tell you something. When you begin any sentence with "they went on the internet," and usually what follows next is not a nice thing. So they go on the internet and tell their wonderful story, only to have somebody on some like out-of-body experience group or some alleged spiritual group not afterlife topics and metaphysics, because I would squelch the person for saying something like this. Come along and say, what a nice experience meeting the holographic data representation of Grandma. I hope you understand it wasn't really Grandma. I have seen this post. I've seen people tell people this. And it is horrible and cringy and inaccurate and causes people a lot of pain and grief. And you are an idiot if you tell somebody something like this. I guess that's all I have to say about that. Let's move on. Number 4, no one can ever know about an afterlife without dying first. We know this is not true because people have near-death experiences and valid out-of-body experiences going to the other side. So there's credible mediumship and hundreds of years of evidence dating back to people like Swedenborg with very credible information about the other side. And these are people who didn't die. You don't have to die. There isn't really death. We already have lives on that side. We just have to tap into it first. The separation between that side and this side is very thin. Dying is just your body shutting down. It's not that big of a deal. You don't have to die to know what's happening in the universe. This is a limited way of thinking. It's a platitude. Grieving people or dying people don't want to hear this because it makes them have to call into question everything that they've been learning about the subject. So it's not a good thing to say to somebody. Number 5, solid experiences after we die are impossible unless we reincarnate. This is a kind of orthodoxy, a fundamentalism that has cropped up as a result of elements of the New Age and fundamentalist religious spheres. So this is basically the very idea behind this is inaccurate from a metaphysical point of view because solidarity is not real. See, what happens is that energy interacts with energy and creates the sensation that I'm holding a red pen. This is the energy, the electrons, the atoms, which are 99.95% empty space, something like that, or 99.5%, I believe. So that energy and those electrons are interacting with mine, creating a sensation and an energetic block between these two things, but it's all still just energy. And the reason that the solidarity doesn't end when we die is because physical and non-physical are misnomers. So this is not kind of the way reality really operates. Things can be both physical and non-physical at the same time, and on any level of existence you can feel stuff and do stuff and open stuff and touch stuff and all that because that's just how reality operates. So again, it's almost like a philosophical point or something that's not addressed in a literal fashion. People who say this, they don't know what they're talking about. They're just regurgitating something some guru said, some yogi said something like this, and so they're just going off of that. People who have like many types of like the solid, the astral types of near-death experiences will repudiate this. What dead people who are communicating from that side will repudiate this. People with doing out-of-body experiences, like legitimate ones, not like lucid dreams, they will repudiate this idea. And ultimately, it has to do with the confusion about what physical is. So there's no such thing as physical. There's no such thing as non-physical. It's all just energy interacting and having different expressions of that. So when grieving people or dying people hear this, they think that, oh, this means that I'm going to be a piece of vapor when I die. And most people, that doesn't appeal to them. To some people it might, but most people it doesn't. They hear this, it causes grief, it causes anxiety. I've seen it countless times. I wish people wouldn't say these things. Number 6, your loved one is in hell. You're going to hell for not doing XYZ. I don't even really need to describe this one. I think the people who buy this are not going to be on this channel in the first place. They're probably going to be down at the Coliseum, at the Rams Center here in Los Angeles, screaming at people that are going to hell. People who are heavily indoctrinated by fundamentalist religion get caught up in a spiral of hatred, and then they will look for evidence that they are better than you, and then they'll use that as an excuse to say that your loved one is in hell or you're going to hell, and they get off on all that negative hatred, negative energy that they're feeding off of it. Very scary stuff. I do believe that there are demons in this universe, and I think they start off this way, feeding off negative energy, and then eventually that leads to becoming something very, very scary that spins off of that. So I'll let you guys chew on that one for a while. Finally, it was all meant to be. one of these platitudes that just doesn't always add up when you are suffering a terrible loss. Um, yes, I think things can happen because they were designed that way, including tragedies, but that doesn't mean that's always how it is, because I think we live in a random world generated to an extent by chaotic circumstances. As an example, if somebody was murdered, then that murderer is interrupting their free will. So that the person with the free will is on their path, and somebody else uses their free will to cancel out the other person's free will. And this is when we go into the actual subject of karma, which I may talk about in a video coming up. So somebody else exercises their free will to block somebody else's path in life, and they have to feel the negative energetic ramifications of that eventually, I believe. Sometimes to a horrific level, I think. But ultimately it means that the person who interrupted that person's free will acted on their own accord, so it wasn't meant to be. Maybe that person leading their life to the fullest was meant to be, and then somebody came down here in this melting pot of souls and messed it all up. So no, it wasn't meant to be. And just like I think somebody can walk out the door and trip on something and become quadriplegic. That's a random circumstance in a world that is very often random. So again, wasn't meant to be. And saying this to people causes usually more grief than good. So in summary, I do want to say that I understand that I will get a lot of flack from people, like talking about how it's not karma that causes, rather it's not your karma causing somebody else to die. I've just pissed off a bunch of Hindus. Speaking about the author who will not be named, who I, by the way, don't dislike this author. I think they have a lot of good work, but I disagree with something that they said. Oh no, how dare I disagree with one thing that somebody said that I see causing a lot of damage to people? Because we all know when someone's really popular, you have to just agree with everything they say at all times, or else you're a heretic. Wait a second, that is definitely human behavior, isn't it? If you're looking out through the history of human culture. The point is that I know the work I do, I'm not always going to have friends. I know people are going to be very, very critical of what I have to say, and sometimes I will be pissing people off, but my allegiance is and always will be with this work to grieving people, dying people, and people suffering from the fear of death. Because the big takeaway point, why I got into this on a more publicized level, is because I came to find that as somebody who's lost now most members of his family relatively recently, somebody who is part of this club, I've come to find that what we learn about the afterlife, the best case scenario, the really, really great concept that we can rejoin our loved ones, and the other side is a wonderful place that is just as real and tangible as our world now, all that stuff turned out to be true. And I was able to verify it by having out-of-body experiences and communicating to the other side, and then delving deep into this world. And it has resulted in a life that is incomparably more meaningful and easier for me. So now I want to help other people also see that. So that's my allegiance. My allegiance is to people who need help in this area. My allegiance is not to other authors or anything like that. I know I may sometimes suffer consequences for that. I may sometimes make a few enemies. But I also see it this way, that anybody who wants to look at the objective evidence and handle it objectively without creating theories that are not provable and that cause pain and grief, then I will be happy to promote them and talk about them, and I won't be critical. But if somebody is going off base, in my opinion, and saying things that are causing harm to grieving, dying people, or people with a lot of fear, and I know that what they're saying isn't true, and basically, to give you an example, I was on a forum where a fan of the author, who I won't name, was responding to somebody who was talking about their after-death contact, and basically they were saying, oh, it's so nice that you got to have this experience, this data-based representation of grandma. I hope you understand it wasn't really grandma, but what a nice experience. And then the poor person was just crushed. So it's almost like I almost don't even care that much if a theory like that maybe has some kind of evidential basis, which it doesn't. At this point, it's almost more about etiquette, because the same person basically said something to the effect of, well, maybe you have to swallow the red pill if you don't like what I have to say. But what if that red pill was just a red tic tac? What if there is no red pill? What if the whole theory is bunk? Then why push that theory down people's throats and cause damage and cause harm to people? And this is why so many people get turned off by, like, quote, spiritual communities, because they see this kind of behavior and it's just really awful. And so that's what I call out, and ultimately because I care about helping people out in this area, and I'm going to keep going with this as maybe I gain more publicity. I'm probably going to still keep pissing people off, but it's all right though, because it's kind of like I'm taking that bullet. I think I have the accountants to deal with it, and I'm going to keep on with it. But also, if you have criticism of my work, I'm not going to flip out about it. I'm happy to talk to you and engage on comments or wherever, as long as it's done cordially. I'm not like super attached to a lot of theories if there's room within the sphere of objective evidence. You're not going to be able to convince me that one of my topics is incorrect based upon something like philosophy, right? Because to me, I care about the objective evidence, and there isn't much room for speculation in going into directions that I don't want to follow. So there is that. Anyway, I hope you like this video. You can get involved by going to the channel description. You can check out my books like Understanding Life After Death. The classes, they're bi-weekly at afterlifetopics.com/university. It's a way to support the work I do by becoming a patron. It's $30 a month. We get one-on-one time together. We have 8 classes a week. It helps keep the work I'm doing going. If you want to try to support it, because I do need the support to be able to do this, probably like 25 hours a week I dedicate to videos, books, writing, forum management, stuff like that. So that's the only way I can keep going with this. So if you want to help me out, then that's great. I'll talk to you next time.